I want to make sure that we spend our time working on the material that you want to work on. Also, I want to review last week's work, fill in some gaps from last week, and then if we have time, move on. If we don't, no big deal. We're not in a rush. We're good on time. So, what sorts of questions, problems, confusions do you have that you want to get to? And by the way, it can, tell me also what's going on with, let's say, quizzes, exams, whatever.
I'm still a little behind, but I'm here just to kind of maintain whatever I might lose.
Okay. I hear you, Cameron.
Same
with
goes for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so all right, so let's have you guys then dictate how we proceed. When we talk about what I'm going to take to be our major concepts, starting with chapter 1, the concept of entailment, aka validity, all the way up through derivations using as needed the Boolean logic and propositional logic rules, right? What do we want to, what do you want to work on? What do we need to do to make sure that you're feeling comfortable? And P.S., it's not like we can't also look at the textbook, like, go through each section that is such that you may say, oh yeah, that reminds me, this bothered me and here's why, or going through quizzes, exams, and so forth. So what do you think?
Are you asking if we have any questions from beginning all the way to propositional rules?
Right. And Abdul, don't worry if you have questions about any of the stuff we talked about last week, which means the introduction of the quantifier logic material. Don't worry, we'll review that, whether it's this week or next week, right? So don't stress over that. But is there anything prior to that you want to talk about?
Yes, I do have a question.
Okay.
So I just reached the rules, the propositional Elim and the intro, and so I'm at a point where if your conclusion is a propositional statement, and you also have like a disjunction in the premise. So to prove that, I'm not sure if this is right. I'm going to say this statement. Do you use both of them? Do you use proof by case and also like assume the antecedent of your propositional statement?
Great question. Here's my unsatisfactory answer, which I'm hoping is going to become satisfactory as we discuss the awesome question that you have. It depends. Okay, so I know that's not satisfactory. The reason why I say it depends is this. When you're given in your premises, or you derive in the course of having set up a propositional logic subproof structure, a disjunction, most of the time you will eliminate it. Right, but elimination of the disjunction depends on what exactly it is that you need, right? So let's suppose, for example, that you're given a disjunction in your premises. 99.9% of the time, you will eliminate it. In other words, if you need one side or the other of that disjunction, you employ the disjunction Elim rule, right? Alternatively, suppose that you want to use the sentence as a whole, the disjunction as a whole, as a contradiction to a negation of that disjunction, then you wouldn't need to eliminate it, right? In other words, so that's what I mean by it depends. But let's do a little bit of work with that. So So here's what I'm thinking. I'll finish the sentence that I wrote. I'll also speak the sentence because I know my writing's not legible. But I'll go ahead and put that down as one of our action items, our agenda items. And then let's see what else people have on the list. Depending on what they have, we'll just go ahead and work this issue. Okay, so intro and Elim rules for the conditional and the biconditional. What do we do when the premises, including any sub conclusion, which is also, right, itself a premise that we use to continue on, is a disjunction. In other words, must we eliminate the disjunction within, within the structuring subproof. For example, let me use in other words, because you've already articulated which ones we're talking about. That is conditional or biconditional intro, right? So each of these connectives are dismantled by way of elimination. There's no subproof involved. But when we want to derive, prove, demonstrate a conditional claim as the conclusion, a biconditional claim as the conclusion, we typically set up the elimination. Okay, so Abdul, how are we doing? Is this what you're after? Is this a question?
Yes, yeah. I think as you progress, I'm going to have more questions, but this is the start of the question.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Remember, folks, I mean, I want to make sure that you get what you need. So even though I am of the mind that, like reading a book or watching a movie, moving forward oftentimes then allows you to retroactively say, oh, I now see why this happened the way it did, or why this person said this, or whatever, right? So I do.
I'm not sure if this is typical, but sometimes I do the problems in the book, and then as I'm driving, it comes to me like, oh, okay, I get it. Like that's why I was wrong.
Yeah. So it can be when you're driving. It can be when you're, pouring your first cup of coffee. I mean, in other words, it's like puberty. It's normal and natural. But unlike puberty, it's a good thing because you go, oh, this is actually a great experience to go, I've got it now. Yeah. So, and indeed, we'll keep drilling down on the questions. What do people have on that front? In other words, rephrase. What else do you guys have in terms of questions? Anything that you want to get to?
On chapter 24, I forget what section. Sorry, I have the book in front of me. But chapter 24 was like the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Made sense to me, and then towards the end, it like completely lost me. And it was more when they were adding like the parentheses.
Oh, sorry, I just was in the wrong section. I'm in the wrong chapter. I'm actually looking at it now. So yeah, chapter 4, we start with the Aristotelian forms. We get into vacuous generalizations and pairs of contradictories. Don't worry, we're going to review this.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that was my question.
Yep.
Mostly the parentheses, because that was really confusing for me.
Okay. So pay particular or special attention to parentheses. Okay, anything else that's on your mind right now that you want to talk about? And don't be shy. If something comes up while we're talking, just let me know. I'll add it to our list. Okay, so far so good?
I think I have one more. I'm just looking at the book.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, take your time. Go take your time. Let me know when you're ready. In the meantime, I'm just going to set something up. So just shout it out, Julianne, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so here's what we have.
Sir, just one little suggestion. I'm switching on my laptop right now. I might lose you for just 1 second.
Sure.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course. Julianne, while Abdul is switching over, have you found what you want to chat about?
Yeah, I think it was just more because when I was trying to do it on my own, I couldn't do the like the practice questions, some of them.
Oh, okay, good. So I'm not good that you couldn't do it, but good. All right, hold on. All right. So,
Chapter 24 and a little bit of 23 towards the end. Sorry, I know that's so vague.
No. You're good. What I'm doing, sorry, I realized it. I don't know. Can you still see can you see what I'm writing?
I just see practice exercises in the text.
Oh, good. Okay. And then you said chapters 23, 24?
Actually, yeah, just 24.
Okay.
Was the one. Yeah, just that chapter in general, I think
Was tricky.
Yeah.
Understandable. Okay. Abdul, have you gotten over to your laptop?
Yes.
Awesome. Can you see clearly the argument that I have on the whiteboard?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Okay. So here's what I'm thinking. Tell me if I'm wrong. When you're working on or you're practicing with the conditional intro and biconditional intro rules, you say, okay, here I notice that my conclusion is a conditional claim. I notice that when my conclusion is a conditional claim, I set up conditional intro, which is to say, I assume the antecedent, the left side of the arrow. I derive the consequent, the right side of the arrow, so that I can then exit the subproof and say, look, I've just proven that if I have C, then I have A, conditional intro by way of lines 3 to whatever. We're not sure yet. Is that is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So two things, yay. Second, you could always also set up disjunction elim if you want, but as you've already acknowledged, you're practicing the conditional intro rule. So the next step is to ask yourself this. When you, and I'll just change the color coding here, when you know that A is your goal, right? So the conclusion of the argument cannot be achieved until you first get to A. So A is right now your conclusion. So the question that you ask yourself is, okay, how do I get A? One answer to that question is, oh, I could set up negation intro because a strategy for proofs is this. When my conclusion is an atomic or a simple sentence, that is a sentence without any connective, I can achieve it by way of negation intro. I can generate a contradiction. But that might end up, being more work than you really need to do. So then you look around and you say, oh, well, I notice that A happens to be the left side of this disjunction at line 1. So if I assume that I have A, I can reiterate it. And I also notice, as I'm thinking along my way, if I assume B, I notice also, hello, contradiction. I love contradictions because among two options, between two options from a contradiction, anything follows, and the anything that you want is the sentence A, right? So you know that you want A in either case, so that when you get out of the subproof, you can say, I've just shown that, and I just clicked out of my whiteboard. Hold on. Come on, Mia, you can do it. Okay, I'm back. So you get out of the green subproof and you say, I've just shown that from the elimination of the disjunction at line 1, along with my 2 subproofs, I've proven A. Whether I have A or I have B, I got A. That's what you're doing with that subproof. So 4 and 5, 6. Line 7 now tells you, or at line 7, you're now in a position to say, hey, I need to work line 2. I haven't worked line 2 yet. Look, I can affirm my antecedent. So I can derive not B. And from not B and the assumption that I have B, I've got my contradiction. From a contradiction, anything follows. And so A, therefore C, then A.
Oh, line 7, not B. The justification would be propositional elimination, right?
Yeah, it's going to be your conditional elim. So let's work through these. So we've got at line 3, I'll just do them all in black just so that it's I don't waste time going back and forth. So line 3 is an assumption. Line 4 is an assumption. Line 5 is a reiteration of line 4. Line 6 is an assumption. Line 7, you're exactly right, conditional elim from 2 and 3. Line 8, contradiction elim from 7. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited, I've jumped ahead. Contradiction intro, thank you, Abdul, from lines 6 and 7. And now at line 9, we have the elim from 8. And then as we already, this is why it's great to backfill, rephrase, to fill in as much as you can when you're setting up your structure. You've already set up the structure, right? You don't have to remember what you did. Line 10 is disjunction elimination from lines 1, 4 through 5, and 6 through 9. And we've already set up the plan at line 11. We've got 3 through 10 conditional intro. So that's one way for you to think about how you can and probably should work your disjunction when it's a given or when it's somewhere in your proof.
Okay, and the book said that there were 2 ways to exit a subproof. One was the disjunction elimination,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other one was negation intro.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let me do this. So do you have handy your rule sheet? If not, I'll share a different screen and I'll bring it up.
I don't have it handy.
Okay, no worries. No worries. Hold on just 1 second. Okay, let me just make this a little bit smaller so we get everything in. Okay, so basically, yeah, we've got everything in. So, Abdul, to address your really good point, because especially because we're involved in strategic thinking here. When you think about the subproof rules, disjunction elim, negation intro, and then the propositional intro and elim rules, conditional intro and biconditional intro, you've got your strategic rules. So think about it this way. When you've set up what it is that that is your sort of your superstructure blueprint, right? The way that you are going to get out of that is by the rule, whether it's disjunction elim, negation intro, conditional intro, or biconditional intro. When you, within that superstructure, within that structuring subproof, you generate a nested subproof. The question is, how do I get out of this subproof that I've generated? And you're exactly right. You're going to get out of that subproof by way of one of these, the nested subproof, by way of one of these rules. So, if you're within, and again, depending on what you're given, you might end up with two conditional intro rules, one that structures the whole thing and one that's a nested subproof. You might have a structuring subproof that's biconditional intro, and within one of the sequences, right, because these are consecutive sequences, typically, within one of the sequences, you might have negation intro. Again, it just depends on what you have, which is partly why, and I can try to make more sense of this, but which is partly why you want to keep working backward. What do I want to get? What do I have that's going to help me get there?
Sounds good.
Yeah, so far so good. Let's try something that's arguably a little trickier. Come on. Oh, hold on, I'm going to have to stop the share again and start a different way. Okay, so we should have our whiteboard back. Oh, you know what I just did? I'm such a dunderhead. I forgot that when you're using a Zoom whiteboard and you don't save the images before you leave, before you stop screen sharing, it just goes away unless you've preset it to save, which I haven't learned how to do yet. I apologize. But don't worry,
No.
I remember what we're after. All right, so let's try something that's arguably a bit trickier. So what did we have again? So it was A or B, and then it was C, then not B, and then our conclusion was C, then A, right? What if we said, okay, I'm going to set up B, C, then A. I'm going to set up a disjunction elim. Sorry, that's really ugly. Right, so I'm going to set up a disjunction elim to get the animal that I want, which is to say, I'm going to say that C arrow A is the disjunction elimination result of lines 1 and then 3 through whatever and whatever through whatever, right? So we just kind of give ourselves that blueprint, okay? Now, what we want to do is, like I said, work backward. So if we want to generate a conditional, how do we do it? And knowing me, I probably didn't leave us enough room in the proof, so bear with me. But we do this. We say, Well, I'm going to assume that I have C and I want A. Actually, I'm fine for that. So that I can infer, therefore, C then A. And I'm going to have to do the same thing here in the second subproof. I'm going to assume C and I want A. And as you can probably imagine, hello, contradiction again. So before we start to fill in the blanks here, how are we doing, everybody, with this plan? Does the green nested subproof make sense for each of our disjunction elim sequences?
Yeah, so far.
Okay, good, good. You may feel intellectually like lines 4 and 5 are like a little bit of a cheat, but no.
Yeah, where is the C coming from? Oh, no, that's an assume. You're assuming C.
Yep.
And then the A is a reiteration of
yeah,
the
good,
assumption?
good. Beautiful. Yep, you got it. Yeah,
I guess the Logic Adventure book doesn't like the reiteration rule because they never use it. They always try to get it.
Right.
Something.
Right. And one of the things that I know it's not of particular use to you right now, so forgive me for, indulge me if you would. Right. So we don't use reit very often. If we can get away with if we can avoid it, we do. Just because it just seems like, I mean, it's literally repetitive. But given the way that a subproof works, we have to be able to exit the subproof. And in this case, there's unless I've missed something, there's no other way to exit it. So we've got an assumption. We've got an assumption. We've got a reiteration from line 3. Then we have sorry, let me change the color coding because I'm wondering if this might be a little bit visually peculiar to you. So assume, right? Then we have a conditional intro from 4 to 5. Let me just do this real quick while I'm here. And the only reason why I'm drawing these dashes or short lines is because I want to make sure that I don't mess up the rows. I recognize that my writing can be a little bit wobbly. All right, so we have okay, then we go back to an assumption. Then we have conditional elim 2 to, what was it, 8. Then we have contradiction intro. And you're already seeing, you saw this a while ago, we're doing the same thing. We're just swapping the nesting, right? So contradiction intro, 7 and 9. Contradiction elim, 10. And then again, conditional intro. This bad boy is a little bit longer. 8 through 11, if I'm not mistaken. And then finally, we can replace our question marks with 3 through 6 and 7 through 12. So awesome question, Abdul. Fantastic question. The way that you have talked about working through it is exactly right.
I'm trying.
How are you doing with feeling like, yeah, this is getting us in? Well, let me rephrase that. How are you feeling? Do you feel like, yeah, I was on the right track, I am doing the right stuff?
Yes, now that you explained the parts that I was missing, it makes total sense.
Okay. Do you want to work another one?
I think we're good.
You good? Okay. All right, so, well, I guess the good news is since I'm recording this, even though I won't be able to post the whiteboards that I lost because I was being a dunderhead, and we all know that if something goes wrong, it's because I've been a dunderhead. At least we've got the recordings. Okay, so if memory serves, so Julianne has got some awesome questions about the quantifier material. Do you want to just essentially start from the top? So what we can do is this. We can just review what we did last week, but fill in some of the gaps. And I hope as we're chatting about the review, you'll say, this is what I'm confused about. We need to talk about it more. What do you think? Does that seem like a good plan?
Yeah, that works for me anyway.
Okay. Everybody else, what do you think?
That sounds good.
Okay. All right, so bear with me for just a sec. Okay, sorry, I just want to make sure that I have that I'm looking at the chapter breakouts because I haven't memorized them yet, so I want to make sure I'm looking at them. All right, so here's what I think we should do. All right, so we're introducing quantifier logic. So this is chapters 21 through 33. And it might seem like a lot of chapters, and in terms of just quantity of chapters, yes, but as we know, what our author does is kind of break down concepts into smaller pieces. So that ends up generating more, greater numbers of chapters. All right, so let me follow. Hold on just one second. Let me follow the text just so that I don't miss something that we need to talk about. What I will do now and then, just as an FYI, is maybe gloss over some stuff that I that kind of goes a bit beyond what we absolutely need to know to fulfill our obligations for the course, but also to generate a really robust understanding of the material. Okay, so let's start with, I said chapter 21, right? Yeah, that is right. Okay, good. All right, so we already know, so I'm doing a little bit of review, right? We already know that there are two types of statement: singular and quantified, right? So a singular statement is a statement about an individually named thing. A statement involving, and of course I've got the wrong spacing, a statement involving an individually named person, place, thing, time, and so forth. Right? And then a quantified sentence is a statement involving unspecified quantities. Forgive me. Quantities of unspecified things. So last week, I used the following example. It was Walter last week. It'll be Stewie this week, right? So singular sentence. Stewie is sleeping, right? Here's the quantified statement. And I like to anthropomorphize everything. So that's why you're getting the statement you're about to get. Someone is sleeping. Right? Now, if I look over my left shoulder, I see Stewie sleeping. I also see Bret Michaels sleeping, but I'm not talking about Bret Michaels, but it's still true, right? That someone's sleeping. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we're talking about unspecified stuff. So as a reminder, the way that I tried to work it last week was this. We've got a universe of stuff, right? We've got stuff that is, tables and chairs. We've got trees. We've got Republicans. Republicans. We've got Democrats. And not Democrates. Good, Mia. Republicans. We've got Democrats. We've got humans. Dogs. You get the idea, right? So we've got this universe of stuff. And when we're talking about stuff that's a dog, stuff that's a cat, stuff that's a table, right? We're not naming the thing, right? So it's not like we're naming this or that dog, or we're naming this or that Democratic politician, right? So the difference between the singular statement and the quantified statement is that one uses names and the other doesn't. Okay, so here's a standard way that we can talk about in what's also known as predicate logic, that we can talk about singular statements and then move to quantified statements. Right, so recall that when we were working in truth functional logic, Boolean and propositional, we talked about simple statements that were then compounded in terms of capital letters A through Z, right? So if we wanted to talk about Stewie, right? Stewie is sleeping. We would have done something like this. Capital S is Stewie is sleeping, right? But if we want to follow the predicate version of the singular statement, we will notate something like the following: sleeping, capital S sleeping, and then lowercase s Stewie. Or we could take capital S sleeping and lowercase s for Stewie. In other words, how you notate it is really a matter of convention, right? So now let's think about let's think about the sentence, someone is sleeping. We haven't named anyone, right? So we've got sleeping. So we've got the predicate. The predicate is what we say about the subject, right? So the predicate sleeping goes with what? I mean, we haven't named anything. Well, what we do is we use variables. So names are replaced by variables, which is going to be lowercase x, y, z. So variables are just placeholders. So we get sleeping x. But the question that still remains is, well, how many? Right? How many entities are sleeping? And that's where we get our two quantifier symbols. But before going on, how does this sound? Does this ring some bells?
Looks good so far.
Yeah, so far so good? Okay. You know, and one of the things that we find is as we review stuff, right? And maybe we use the same language, but maybe there are different examples, or maybe there's, you know, the language is you know, the sentence structure or something is slightly modified. You know, it's kind of like what it's something like what Abdul was saying when he said, oh, you know, I'm driving along and suddenly it, you know, it hit me, right? The more you just kind of ruminate on this stuff and live with it, the more easily it is the more easily the clicking, the connecting, the resonating happens, and it will. All right, so now the question is, what is the quantity? And in quantifier logic, we've got two quantities, okay? Now, last week, I talked about two types of statement in terms of simple and compound, remember? So before we talk about the quantities, let's go back to that. So I'm going to draw a new whiteboard, but first I'm going to save this. Oh no, that already saved. Okay, yeah. Okay. All right, so we already know that statements are either simple, atomic, or compound. The same applies to quantified sentences. Okay, so we can say that, so how about something like this? Not everything sleeping is a dog, right? We could also say everything sleeping is a dog, right? So, you know, here we're implicitly, although I'm now about to make it explicit, getting into, you know, domains of discourse. So what I mean by that is this: if you and I know that there are several types of creature, you know, in a house, we got humans, we got dogs, we got cats, and suppose that we recognize that the cats are awake, the cats are awake, the humans are awake, and we say, oh, you know, the stuff that's sleeping is a dog, right? Or only dogs are sleeping. Only the dogs are sleeping, something like that, right? So we've got quantification, or sorry, rephrase, we've got simple and compound. that is atomic or compounded by a connective, also with the quantifiers. Okay. All right, so there are two quantifiers. We've got the universal and we have the existential. So the universal tells us about the entirety of a class, right? So everything. The existential tells us about at least one thing. So let's start with the existential, just given the example that I used earlier. So if I say that Stewie is sleeping, and then I say someone is sleeping, then that means that the quantifier is an existential. And in our system, and in fact, basically in all systems, the existential is notated symbolically by a backwards E. But notice also that if you're working on your phone or your iPad or heck on your, a keyboard of a tower computer or a laptop, you don't have easy access to the backwards E. So what our textbook author does, which is incredibly kind of thoughtful, is to say, well, when we're dealing with the existential in quantifier logic, we'll just use a forward-facing E. But backward-facing E that's the standard, backward-facing capitalized E is the standard for the existential. So we say, there is something, and that thing is sleeping. Now we've got the quantity that we were asking about in the last whiteboard, right? So let me go back. Remember earlier, I said, hey, what's the quantity of the sleeper, right? We've got entity sleeping. That's all that we've got right now, but we don't know how many. Well, when we go to the quantifier notation, we see, oh, okay, backwards E tells me that there is at least one. So the way that we read this this claim is, there is something, and that thing is sleeping, which I know it's a bit mouthy, but you get the idea. So the quantifier ranges across the predicate and the variable, and that variable is bound by that quantifier. Now suppose that you say to me, Mia, will you stop anthropomorphizing the dog? Specify, you've got a dog there, you've got a cat there, right? What is sleeping? And I'll say, oh, okay, fine, I'll specify that what's sleeping is a dog, right? So I'll say, some dogs are sleeping. And now we've got to deal with two predicates. Why? Because remember, we've got the stuffy stuff of the universe, right? Stuff that's dog. So the stuffy stuff is kind of your subject, if you will. And then we're predicating in either the identity sense of predication or the property sense of predication, and we won't get too deep into that right now. We'll talk about the identity symbol, which will clear some of it up. But the point is that the stuffy stuff of the universe has, in this case, dogness and sleepingness predicated of it. So we get the following. There is something, parenthesis, that thing is a dog, and that thing is sleeping. Close parenthesis. So what's the first thing that we want to notice about the scope of the quantifier? Well, similarly to a negation, We understand the scope of the quantifier according to a pair of parentheses. If we have no parentheses, then we have right now what's known as a non-well-formed formula. Right now, the existential covers only dog. It does not cover the entity sleeping, right? So right now, we've only got this relation. It's similar to saying, okay, it's not the case that A and it's B versus not both A and B. It makes a big difference to have a pair of parentheses.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Does that work a bit? Yeah. So before we move on though, Julianne, because this is, I mean, you're right on track with saying, hey, we've got to drill down on understanding the work of parentheses here. Do you want to talk about how this is working for you?
Just by like what the parentheses means, because like when I started the chapter on my own, it was making sense, and then when they started adding like, you know, more parentheses and more X's and it started to look more complex, it just started getting a little confusing. But when you write it down step by step so I could see what's inside the parentheses, like what it means, it's helpful.
Okay.
Sorry, that was kind of complicated.
No, it makes sense. And one of the reasons, and I appreciate you being willing to share your thinking, when there's something about verbalizing or handwriting, but certainly in this case of verbalizing, talking through your confusion, talking through a thought process that does a lot of clarifying work. So the more you can do that, you know, the better. So thank you for that. Okay, what are you thinking?
Your example on the bottom, sorry, my computer's covering it now, but how you use the example of a negation A and B.
Oh, yes, I see. Yep, okay.
That was really helpful.
That helps.
Like,
okay, good. Good. Yeah, bear that in mind, because that will be, you know, so one of the things that we want to talk about is the fact that we are building on, we're adding to what we already know. That said, it's the case that while we can understand, and correctly so, the idea of scope for a quantifier in terms of scope for a negation, right? We're going to see that there are some important distinctions between understanding what makes a quantified sentence true versus, let's say, what makes a truth functional sentence true. Okay, so yeah, don't let go of that. Know that we're going to keep kind of flexing that idea and getting more and more out of it. Okay, so now suppose, let's see. So let me make sure. Okay, so let's do a little bit more technical work in terms of what we've been talking about. We've got the existential quantifier, which is a backwards E. What I haven't given you is the universal quantifier, which is an upside down A. So here again, as with the existential notation, when you are, doing work in the textbook, you won't need to try to get to whatever your keyboard version of the upside down A is. Instead, Dr. Schnee's like, look, don't worry about it. Just use a regular capital A. And you know, and I know, we've stipulated that for our purposes, the capital letter A in front of a variable is going to be the universal quantifier. Okay? So we get, so how about this? So, you know, I said earlier that Stewie and Brett are sleeping. How about this? Every cat is sleeping. Here again, by the way, we're assuming the domain of discourse is restricted to the stuff in my house, right? Now, we don't have to stipulate that. And in fact, we'll see as we go forward that, for me anyway, the more I can exhaust the notation for everything that is in that sentence, I will, just because I don't want to, the more explicit I can be, the clearer the sentence is, even if the sentence is, oddly enough, more complicated in terms of notation. Okay, so every cat is sleeping. Here's what we get. For every x, if x is a cat, then, oh shoot, sorry, I just lost my, there it is. Then x is sleeping. Okay. So before we move on to our forms, we've got a couple of things that we need to do. So, but let's review what we've got so far. Okay, so we have singular and quantified statements, each of which, what am I writing? Sorry. Each of which is either simple, that is atomic, or compound. Quantified, oh, sorry, let me back out of that real quick. When we notate a singular sentence in predicate logic, which, you know, as we're talking about it, everything that we've done before now, we could notate in predicate logic, right? In other words, when we are talking about Quinn being guilty, Pia being guilty, all that stuff, and we used P, Q, R, right, A, B, C, D, we could just say, oh, okay, well, we've got our grammatical subject, that's going to be our name, our individual constant, and then we'll use, you know, whatever the predicate is, or multiple predicates are, right? Some systems will start us off at the outset with this sort of language, and then use for probably just for visual clarity, right? But also for some interesting logical reasons, capital letters to deal with the truth functional stuff. Okay, so predicate logic will go something like this. When we notate a singular sentence in predicate logic, we use an individual constant or name which takes a predicate, right? So the example can be, okay, cat, Brett, right? We could, if we didn't want to use predicate logic, we could just use B for Brett is a cat, right? So Brett is a cat. B is also Brett is a cat, right? Then when we've got the notation for quantifier logic, we replace the name with a variable because we don't have a name. We're not specifying. So when we notate a quantified sentence when we notate a quantified sentence, we we use a variable to reflect a lack of specificity about the entity in question. That's not the most elegant way to put it, but that's what I'm sticking with for right now. So we can say that something is a cat becomes, as we know, variable, cat, variable, right? Everything is a cat, universal, cat, variable. Right. So we already know then that there are two quantifiers. So our entire logic in this part of in this system, right, consists of two quantifiers, consists of variables, right? So we've got the universal and the existential. Oops, I ran out of room. Universal and existential. Now we've got some more work to do, but for folks who've been working on this a bit, how are we doing? I don't think it's brand new to anybody, because I either saw you last week or you, like Julianne had said, had already done some reading. So I think I hope that you say, oh yeah, I've got this. Let's see. All right, so I'm just looking at the chapter. I want to make sure I haven't forgotten to include anything. Right. And then we've got atomic sentences. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the notation that we have. So we include now, or we add to, I should say, we add to our existing notation the predicate, variable, and quantifier. Okay. Now there's one more item that we need to add. What was there? Something else that I wanted to say. Bear with me for just a sec. I'm going a little bit out of order. That's why I want to, yeah. Okay. All right. So let me be a little bit more specific here. So you'll see or you have seen, you'll see FOL a lot now. This stands for first order logic, which includes what we've studied so far, but also includes the quantifiers, variables, and what we haven't talked about much, but what we've used it now and then, identity. Okay, so quantifiers, predicates, and identity. These are not truth functional. So when we want to end up talking, and we will, about what makes a quantified sentence true or false, or why is it that an argument that we know is valid because we understand, let's say, the meaning of the identity symbol doesn't come out valid on a truth table, right? We need to understand that the logic that the logic that constitutes the sort of the machinery that we see in action in a truth table, right, is specific to the connectives that we've talked about. As I mentioned a while ago, there are some logicians who do not include the conditional and the biconditional under the auspices of truth functionality for reasons that we've discussed before. Instead, they think that, the Boolean operators, full stop, that's it for truth functionality, right? Those who do say, well, we do use conditionals. We do think of the conditional definitely and the biconditional less often because it's used less often, but we think of them in truth functional terms. Okay, so we'll stipulate, a meaning of the conditional and the biconditional to make it work truth functionally. But quantifiers, predicates, the identity symbol, they just resist any kind of that interpretation. So I'm making that note now. We'll get to it in a little bit, but let me give you just an example that we'll come to. So quick example. Right, you and I know that the following piece of reasoning is valid. The premises entail the conclusion. Premise 1, A is identical to B. Premise 2, B is identical to C. So, conclusion, right? So, A is identical to C, right? So, the argument is valid, but a truth table says it is invalid, and that's because invalid. And that's because because the identity symbol itself is not truth functional. It is a predicate, and it's the only predicate that gets its own symbol, right? But think about other predicates, like think about to the left of, to the right of, for in front of, back of. You and I know that an argument I'll throw out in just a moment is valid, but the truth table won't understand it as such because there's no connective involved. Right? There's no machinery. There's sort of no operator machinery to work. So think about it this way. So here's a relational predicate, right? Suppose that I say A is larger than B. So that's sentence 1, that's sentence 2. B is larger than C. So A is larger than C. This is valid, but again, won't come out valid on the truth table because it's not truth functional. Okay. So we want to, we're going to toggle back and forth as we're thinking about these quantified sentences between parts of a quantified sentence that we could manipulate in terms of truth functionality without affecting the meaning and the truth value of the quantified sentence. Okay. All right. So let's see. One of the things that we haven't talked about, and we said we were going to talk about it, we said last week that we talk about it this week, involves individual constants. So we're going to stipulate that when we use an individual constant, that name is, what's the word that I want? There's a word I want, I can't think of, but that name applies to one and one object only. And the reason why we do this is in the system is to avoid confusion. So let me try to give you an example, but let me make the note. So individual constants or names always refer to or denote a single entity or object. Right? So, for example, I'm this semester I'm working with a person named Mia. My name is Mia. Well, if Mia's name is Mia and Mia's name is Mia, how are we supposed to tell who's who, right? You probably have met somebody or know of somebody who has the same name that you do, at least the same first name, right? It's a rarity that somebody has a name that nobody else has. So what do we do when we're in the business of trying to make sure that we understand that we're talking about this person and not that person, right? Well, we've got all sorts of ways to do it, right? Logic doesn't have a lot of ways. So once a name is given, that name belongs to that object. So, if I'm talking about Stuart or I'm talking about Bret Michaels, right? That's Bret Michaels is that cat there, right? Forget what you think you know about a singer named Bret Michaels. That's Bret Michaels, right? Stuart Stuffy Chunks Thompson. That's it right there. There's no other Stuart Stuffy Chunks Thompson. So in logic, when we name something, that name is going to hold for that object and can't be applied to any other object, right? So we can say that one object can have multiple names, but no two objects can share a name, right? So for example, we can say that, let's make an identity statement. Who's popular right now for you kids? Is it Cardi B? I'm hearing there's Megan Thee Stallion. Who's kind of my generation was like 50 Cent, P. Diddy, Mark Twain. Who's a multi-name singer? Madonna. That's when I was a kid. Who's a multi-name singer? Give me somebody. Don't make me come up with an example because you'll regret it. Come on. I imagine that Berman's got one. Yeah, see, I knew it. I was going to say Berman. Give me
I don't
one.
know. I couldn't hold it in any longer.
Give me one.
You said a singer, you said?
Sure, anybody you want with multiple names.
Oh, with multiple names? Would it be like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know Eminem's real name.
Oh, yeah, Marshall Mathers.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's right.
Eminem is identical with Marshall. I don't know if I'm spelling his name right. Marshall Mathers. Well, let's smash the names together because that's what we would do, right? So Marshall Mathers. Nice. Okay. So one object can have multiple names, but no two objects can share a name, right? So, you can't say, I don't know, let's say, so here's the problem. We've got Julianne Kane, but we also have Julianne Moore, right? Who's who? So every object always gets only one name, okay? Now you might say, but Mia, we're dealing with quantified sentences. We're not dealing with names. Well, sometimes we will, right? Because remember, we're dealing not just with this additional material, but we're continuing to work with the existing material, right? All right, so let's at least, I think we should pretty nicely or pretty easily be able to get to where we were, last week, and then we can just pick up. I'm not worried about time. I want to make sure that you're comfortable. I'd rather not just jump into brand new material before you feel like you've got the current material under your belt. So we were already ahead of schedule last week. Remember, I accidentally got us ahead by several chapters. Oopsie. So let's just get to effectively where we were last week. We might add a little bit, and then we're right on track in terms of where we need to be in the schedule. But before we go forward, I think Julianne, earlier you had mentioned some questions about some of the exercises in the text. Do you have an idea of which ones you wanted to go through? Or do you want to look them up? What's easiest for you?
Okay. Sorry, my internet's kind of slow today.
No worries. I know we had a power outage and then it didn't last long, but then I was late to class tonight because in between office hours and our class, or this afternoon, my internet was acting wonky again. So no worries. It happens.
No, I think I'm fine because everything was on a 24.2, which was like the advanced forms, and you pretty much just went over all of that. So
okay, yeah, and in fact, we're actually so let's make sure that we're comfortable with our standard translations. Okay, so the Aristotelian forms. These are our friends. They are going to serve as our foundation for complicated sentences. Okay. So, when we start to get into, and if you feel confused by the work we're going to get into, it's normal. It's really normal. When we get into some more complicated quantifier translations, having these as our foundation is really, really helpful. Just know that for most of us, I'm not quite sure why, but for most of us, quantifier translating tends to be what gives us the some trouble in this material. What I can say that I think will make you happy is when we are done working on this stuff, I believe that we'll feel like we've got a much clearer grasp of what the logical structure is of our ordinary English sentences. And it really just, to my mind, it's like a clarification of concepts. You know, I feel like I understand the contours of the logical contours of language so much better. In addition, when we get to the derivation stuff, we're going to do the same thing that we did before with the Boolean and propositional logic material. Namely, we'll have a pair of rules, intro and elim, for the universal and the existential, and that's it. That's all we have. And then so it's not like there's a ton of stuff that we're adding, right? At least I hope you feel that way. Okay, so here are our basics. Okay, so we've got we've got the universal affirmative, right? For every x, if S is an x, so subject class, then if x is S, then x is P. So for every x, if x is S, then x is P. Universal negative. For every x, if x is S, then x is not P. Existential affirmative. There is at least one thing. It is an S and it is a P. So some S are, so let's pause. Universal affirmative, all S are P, or every S is a P. Universal negative, no S are P, or there's not even one thing that is, right? Although that's the language of the existential. Existential affirmative, some S are P, or there is at least one S that is a P, and then existential negative. There is an X, it's an S, but it's not a P. Notice that on the standard translation, the negation goes on in front of the P class. In the universal, it's the consequent. In the existential, it's the right side of the conjunction. Now, this is for, you know, a following Aristotle, for, you know, a standard universal claim where you're talking about the relationship between classes, affirmatively or negatively, or the standard existential claim where you're talking about the relationship between at least one member of the subject class and, right, affirmatively or negatively. But we can also talk about these in terms of a single predicate. So, for example, we can say universal P, universal not P, existential P, existential not P. And let me read those to you. So the first one, universal affirmative, everything is P. Universal negative, everything is not P. Existential affirmative, something or at least one thing is P. And existential negative, there is at least one thing that is not P. Okay. How are we doing? And one thing I'd mentioned last week that I said I would do, and I haven't done but will, is provide you with a bunch of additional like translation practice. Okay. And what I encourage you to do is to read the sentence first in terms of the relevant Aristotelian form, right? So think about it this way. Suppose that I have the following sentence. Right, so we've got our dogs and our cats. Suppose that I say all the dogs and cats are sleeping. Right? So we've got our universal, the copula, which is the conjugation of the verb to be, is the word are, right? So the universal we know is the upside down X. The conjugation of the verb to be are becomes the arrow, right? So here's our scope. How are we doing with that? Can you see it okay, or is it unclear? Visually, you're okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've got to deal with dogs, cats, and sleeping things. Well, the sleeping things are on the right side of the copulation. The conjugation, the copula, the conjugation of the verb to be. So we have sleeping, right, X. Now we need to deal with dogs and cats. So we've got another pair of parentheses, right? Because we need to denote that the arrow is the main connective. We've got our original parens because we need to show the scope of the quantifier, right? But notice that the dogs and the cats, those are the jointly are the antecedent. But we don't want to just translate, if you will, sort of in a slavish way. In other words, we don't want to be literal here. If we say dog entity, so if we say entity dog and entity cat, then we're saying for everything it's a dog. If it's a dog and a cat, no, we don't mean that. We want to say for every X, if X is a dog or a cat, then X is asleep or X is sleeping. And I shouldn't use the verb sleeping, right? Because, on going all the way back to Aristotle, we're talking about, classes of thing. So we have nouns or noun phrases. But the modern version doesn't restrict us. We have, because we have like relational predicates and so forth. So the relation of, let's say, liking is not a noun, and it's used just fine. Right, so does it make sense why we use the disjunction in this case?
I could use one more example.
Yeah, sure. Okay. All right, so what if we say this? No reptiles and how about no, let me change that. No lizards and frogs are comfortable in cold weather. Okay, so start with our Aristotelian form. We say that we've got a no, we've got a universal negative. So a universal negative is going to look like this, right? Where we've got our arrow, and then on the other side, on the right side of the arrow, we've got our negation, right? Now, I'm just, instead of writing out the word frog and the word lizard and things comfortable in cold weather, I'm just going to use just a capital letter just to save space. So what I need to do now is I need to say, okay, we're talking about things that are lizards or that are frogs. I don't say lizards and frogs because a lizard is not a frog is not a lizard, right? So instead of saying LX conjunction FX, I say LX disjunction FX. So the way that we read this is as follows. For every X, if X is a lizard or a frog, right? Or for every X, whatever X's are lizards or frogs, instead of saying lizards and frogs. Does that help a little bit? And then we say not comfortable in cold weather. Oops. What do we think? How are we doing?
Can you read it out again for me? So
Sure.
it's for every X.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
let's keep going. So for every X, if X is a lizard or frog, then it's not the case that X is comfortable in cold weather. Right, so the for every X, you could say for all X, for any X. It's a little bit more awkward, but you could say for all things X, right? It's a, that verbiage is a version of the all SRP. And one of the things that we might do is, for example, is to say, okay, let's go back to, what we know is Julianne's bag deal thing, what Julianne knows a lot about, so that the sentences that we come up with will kind of connect with you because you know so much about that topic, right? And then you can extrapolate from that to the structure itself. That's not what I want. Hold on just a second. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, how are we doing with that basic idea? And again, I mean, we can, like, starting next week, for example, we can start drilling a lot of translation practice. But how are we doing with the basic structure of the sentence?
for me, it's making a lot more sense.
Feeling a bit better? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's look at let's just finish up with to bring us to where we were last week. Let's look at the pairs of contradictories as well as equivalences. And I think that working through that should be kind of a nice, I hope, a nice refresher where you say, no, I remember this, and it makes even more sense now. Or if you hadn't quite got to it, or you read it, you were a bit confused, you say, oh, okay, now I can go back and read and feel more comfortable. So this is what we're about to do is what we were tackling last week. Did we also? Yeah, so we did contradictories and we did equivalences. We didn't, we'll work next week on quantifier distribution and counterexamples and multiple quantifiers. Yeah. Let's see. Right. Okay. All right. So the 4 standard forms divide into pairs of contradictory statements. And we want to know these because, you know, we love contradictions. They're our friends, right? So let's first take the ordinary English, and then we'll move into the translation, the symbolic logic notation for the 2 predicate version of each of the statement types, and then we'll reduce it to 1. So I'll write out what I mean by that, and then we'll go to the next page. So all SRP, right? So we have universal SP, but we also have universal P, right? So we have in the first notated or symbolically, the first sentence using symbolic logic notation is for every X, if X is an S, then it's a P. But we can also just assert the atomic sentence, everything is P, right? So the scope of the first sentence is restricted to the things that are S. The second sentence just says everything is P, and it's either the case that we're saying everything in the universe is P, or somehow we've stipulated and we know what the domain of discourse is, right? So if I say, oh, everyone's sleeping, and I know that you know that I've stipulated already that I'm only talking about the dogs in the house, then I don't have to say it's the dogs that are sleeping. I just say everybody's sleeping. Okay. So no SRP. Or actually, you know what? This will make the notation or the comment that I made earlier sharper. So here's our first pair of contradictories. Some S are not P. Then our second pair no SRP and some SRP. So, you know, we're saying it now, but we're going to talk about what it means shortly. Okay, so here's pair number 1, pair number 2. Okay, so what do we mean when we're talking about these 2 pairs? Rephrase. What are we talking about when we're saying that each of these pairs are contradictories? Well, we're saying the following. If the universal affirmative is true, the existential negative must be false. They can't be true at the same time. They can't be false at the same time. So also, if the existential negative is true, the universal affirmative must be false. right? So can't be true at the same time, can't be false at the same time. Same with universal negative, same with the universal negative and the existential affirmative. If no SRP is true, some SRP can't be true, must be false. If some SRP is true, no SRP can't be true, right? So let's walk through these. So example, if all dogs are animals is true, then some dogs are animals is false, right? If, oh, sorry, I wrote that incorrectly. I apologize. Some dogs are not animals is false, right? If some instruments are not pianos is true, then, oops, then all instruments are pianos is false. And I'm giving you, obviously, sentences that we know are true or false, but it's not the content that we're after. It's the structure of the thing, right? So let's think about it this way. Let's nest our circles. Here's a way to diagram the sentence all SRP, right? So whatever S's there may be, they're all dumped into the P circle, right? If that's true, then it's impossible for there to be even one S, right, that's outside of the P class. And we can use infective Venn diagram, which is a much easier way to go than trying to nest. Well, nesting circles is easy, but trying to diagram, in this case, an existential negative. It'll also be the case that it's easier to diagram the other two as well. So suppose that I have overlapping circles. Here's S, here's P. Here's S, here's P. Suppose also that when I diagram the sentence all S are P, I shade the area of S outside of P. Basically, what I'm doing is saying whatever, oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm saying that shading says there's no here here. You can't put anything here. It's as if I've done that, right? There's nothing, there's no here here, there's no there to put anything, right? So that's what the shading does. Now, if I say some S are not P, notice what I'm doing. Here, I'll put an X. There's an S that's outside the P class. Notice that I've just contradicted what I've said, which is that you can't put anything in the shaded area because there is no area to mark. So when the universal affirmative is true, the existential negative is false, and vice versa, because they're contradictories. You can do the same thing with the other two proposition types, right? So all S are P and some S are not P are contradictories. Oops. Okay, now let's go to the next one. If no lizards are frogs is true, then some lizards are frogs is false. Right? Similarly, if some instruments are cellos is true, then no instruments are cellos is false. And here again, we can build our diagramming, right? So let's say, here's our universal negative. No SRP. Here's our S class, here's our P class, and they're mutually exclusive of each other, right? On the other hand, some SRP tells us that here's an S and it's within the P class, right? Which we've just said on the if the universal negative is true can't be the case. Here again, though, like I mentioned earlier, you know, the diagramming needs to be a bit clearer. So what if instead we work Venns? Right? So no SRP, right, tells us there's no way to have anything in the shaded area. There's no here. But some SRP just says there is at least one S that is a P, right? So you've got an X in the area of overlap. So, oops, wrong one. So no S, criminy, no SRP and some SRP are contradictories. Here's another way to write it that's a little less, in terms of the symbolic logic notation, a little less busy visually. So this sentence these are contradictories. Let's just put it this way. It'll be easier, I think. Contradictories. Oh, notation, Mia. Right, so the first one, everything is, something is not. So everything is P, something is not P. Everything is not, something is. Everything is not P, something is P. Right, so we can, does that language start to feel more comfortable in terms of their status as contradictories? You can't have, both can't be simultaneously true, both can't be simultaneously false. Okay. We can get to equivalences, though. Or let me rephrase that. We can talk about universals and existentials in terms of equivalent statements, not just contradictories. So here are some equivalences. These are our foundational equivalences. Everything is equivalent to, it's not the case that there is even one thing that's not. A little wordy, I know, but, right? Everything is not, or nothing is. Is equivalent to, it's not the case that there is even one thing. Right? We notice, by the way, that when you have the affirmative universal, the quantifier is changed and a negation is placed on either side of it. Notice that when you have a negation on one side of a quantifier, you change the quantifier and push the negation through. There is at least one thing. It's not the case that everything is not. And something is not is equivalent to, it's not the case that everything is. Right, so you can see how you're pushing negations through, and as you're doing that, changing the quantifier or changing the quantifier and pushing negations through. You know, we want to know these equivalences for a number of reasons, not least of which is it's really easy to kind of get lost in them, right? But when we're really having to focus on what it is that we're saying when we say everything is or nothing is, right? Then we've got this benefit. In addition, we've got the benefit in derivation work. In some versions of the system that we're learning, we can work what's known as quantifier exchange or change of quantifier rules. We can replace one sentence with another as we need it. We'll end up proving these equivalences, not just using them. So it's nice to know what they are, and then of course we'll drill down into what it is that we're saying when we assert these equivalences, such that we can see the logical structure of each. How are we doing? What do we think? Are you feeling any better than last week? Worse? The same? Not sure.
I feel better, at least.
A little better? Okay. I hope so. I hope so. I'm not sure what I saved. I think I saved these. So here's what I think we should, did I save these already? Oh, I did. Okay. So here's what I think we should do. Let's break off. Do as much work as you can in the chapters that we've covered. Note to yourself or make a note of anything that you want to go over, so that next week we can cover questions, problems, confusions. We can move forward into the last bit of our material, and we can do a bunch of practice. That's one of so basically, I'd like to try to be a little bit ahead of schedule so that we're practicing next week. We're also practicing the last 2 weeks, because that's really all we have left. I also know that I owe you an exam 3 retest. I haven't made it up, but I will. Please don't forget, if you want to retest anything, I'll take the better of the 2 scores. So there's no drawback to retesting, right? And always, if you have any questions about any of the assessments or any of the material, whatever it is, please let me know. I want to know if I've made an error on something, in my haste to get things done, or if I've overlooked something, whatever it might be. Okay. So as usual, I've got office hours, so please feel free to drop in if you want to. If you want to chat but you can't make office hours, you know the drill. Just let me know and we can set up a time to chat. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your week. If you have any questions, stick around. Otherwise, have a great week, and I'll see you next week.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye.